YT-2400 is the often overlooked little brother of the YT-1300. Slightly smaller, slightly goofier, slightly more asymmetrical, and slightly less famous, but no less interesting. In fact, one of the most famous ships from the Legends continuity, the Outrider, was a YT-2400. That's why this week we are taking a look at the design, specifications, and history of this fantastic freighter. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and this is the YT-2400.
They've got cargo of some kind. Maybe they're smugglers.
Design. The YT-2400 class light freighter was a relatively small cargo ship built by the Corellian Engineering Corporation. Like most YT series designs, it had a circular main hull with a wide-bar engine at the rear and cannons on the top and bottom. This freighter was far more asymmetrical than most, though, as its cockpit was held on a starboard outrigger far from the ship's center of mass. At the rear of the cockpit tube was the ship's main escape pod, and it had an additional escape pod in the saucer on the opposite side near the ship's single docking ring. At the rear of the ship was its engine, a fairly standard CEC wide-bar ion engine. This was typically encased in a bulky rectangular housing, but some were occasionally seen with a YT-1300 style bar stretching the full width of the ship's rear instead. The YT-2400 was the first wide-bar engine YT series freighter to be sold without an alternative option for standard cylindrical engines, though there were aftermarket kits to use these instead for pilots who disliked the wide bar's flight handling. Like other YT freighters, it was designed for the maximum possible amount of customization, with seemingly unlimited options for interior layout, engines, weapons, and armor. Even stock, it was heavily armored, and while its stock weapons and engines were fairly standard, its reactor was so powerful it could support enormous upgrades to each. It was designed this way to market it to shipping companies in hazardous Outer Rim territories, but this made it very popular among smugglers and pirates as well. The interior of every YT-2400 was slightly different, but most followed the same basic layout. At the center of the ship were the gun wells on the top and bottom like the YT-1300. These were accessed from the main hallway, a semicircular corridor, also much like that seen on the 1300. At the rear you could find the ship's engineering space, and occasionally passenger cabins on some models. At the front, the ship had its main cargo hold and a crew lounge. The ship's modest crew quarters were located on the forward bracing arm connecting the cockpit tube to the ship's main hull. There was also a less common variant of the ship known as the YT-2400 BT. This model was constructed symmetrically so that it had one outrigger arm on each side. The left side arm held a powerful laser turret instead of a second cockpit, and it had an additional docking ring as well. The YT-2400 had a somewhat interesting design history in real life, too. It was created for the video game Shadows of the Empire in 1996. The first draft was created by lead artist John Knowles, a different guy, by the way, than the more famous John Knoll, former VFX artist and current chief creative officer at ILM, and co-creator of Photoshop. If I had a nickel for every Star Wars artist named John Knoll, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Second tangent, John Knowles, the video game artist one, not the ILM one, was also used as the model for the Outrider's pilot, Rendar, on a trading card around the same time. Anyway, the first draft was made by John and, according to him, looked too much like the dropship from Aliens. The second draft was created by artist Killian Plunkett, who came up with an unusual wasp-like design that could fold in on itself. Eventually, the task of designing the Outrider would be given to now legendary designer Doug Chiang, with the instruction of Lucasfilm continuity editor Alan Kausch to create something like the Millennium Falcon to mirror Rendar's similarity to Han Solo, executive editor Sue Rostoni's guidelines that it should be comparable to but smaller than the Falcon, and finally John Knoll's new idea to make it a cross between the Falcon and a B-Wing, Doug Chiang created the concept sketch that would become the ship we know and love today. With the whole team very happy with the design, production of the Outrider then passed back to Knowles, who used the sketch to create the model scene in the game. Specifications. The YT-2400 measured 21 meters long by 28.5 meters wide and about 7 meters tall. It had a top speed of 800 kilometers per hour and a Class II hyperdrive, though these were typically the first things to be upgraded on a YT-2400. It was armed with 2 dual laser cannon turrets by default, and had an additional 11 weapons hardpoints built in to allow a wide variety of armament customization. It had a crew of 2, but could be flown by just 1, and could carry 6 passengers. It had an impressive cargo capacity of 150 metric tons, and it carried 2 months of consumables as well. It also had an external magnetic clamp to hold additional cargo outside the craft. Altogether, it had a slightly better cargo capacity than its larger and more famous sibling, the YT-1300, though it lacked some of that ship's bells and whistles like its freight-handling arms and tractor beams. It did cost slightly more than the YT-1300 as well, at 130,000 credits new or 32,000 used, but most would agree that it provided a great value for the price. History. The YT-2400 entered production sometime before the Battle of Yavin. It was created to replace the rather rare YT-2000 light freighter. That ship was created in the early Imperial era, but corporate spies leaked its specifications to CEC's competitors, forcing them to begin manufacturing it before testing was complete to avoid letting their competitors beat them to market. As such, it was not nearly as high quality as CEC's products were known to be. It ended up being a popular ship anyway, but CEC designers were not happy with it and quickly began designing the YT-2400 to replace it. The 2400 was released a few years later, and the YT-2000 was immediately discontinued despite its good sales figures. YT-2400s were involved in several noteworthy events throughout galactic history after its release. In 3 BBY, apprentice legislators Amelin Haldo and Leia Organa booked passage to the planet Pamarth aboard a YT-2400 named Mighty Oak Apocalypse, operated by the Wookiee pilot Loghara, who would later join the Rebel Alliance. The next year, Imperial Admiral Thrawn and Ensign Eli Vanto posed as weapons smugglers using a YT-2400 named the Slipknot to infiltrate an insurgency. Later that year, Rebel Commander Jun Sato's nephew and several friends would use Sato's old YT-2400, Sato's Hammer, to fight the Empire at Maikapo as the Rebel Cell Iron Squadron. They were used as bait by Imperial Admiral Constantine to attract the far more significant Phoenix Cell to the planet, though they escaped and rescued Sato's Hammer and its crew. Decades later, several YT-2400s and 2400 BTs were present for the Battle of Exegol. However, the most significant YT-2400 by far is the Outrider. This ship, owned by the smuggler Rendar, was nearly as notorious as the Millennium Falcon, at least according to its owner. The early history of the Outrider is somewhat murky. When asked how he acquired the ship, Rendar typically answered, "Not by clean living," and as such, the story of how he came to own it is unknown by most. However, it was understood to be a gift from Uncle Vanya, a crime boss Rendar worked for in his early mercenary years. Vanya also assigned Rendar a co-pilot who mysteriously died in the first 20 seconds of their first mission together. Over the years, Rendar modified the Outrider quite substantially. These changes included mounting heavy laser cannons to its stock turrets, which he also hand-modified to improve their firepower and range. He also added a pair of concussion missile launchers, coated the hull in titanium armor plating, replaced the stock engine with 3 Congar KG Defender ion engines, and the hyperdrive with a Sorosub Griffin Y2TG, improved the sensors, and added an illegal countermeasure and stealth package. All these modifications were paid for unknowingly by Vanya due to some creative accounting by Rendar's droid Lebo. Rendar and Lebo took on a large number of smuggling and mercenary jobs in their career, but the most famous missions of theirs were the ones they did for the Rebel Alliance. Due to their infamy, the Alliance approached the Outrider crew for a mission to smuggle supplies to Echo Base on Hoth. Rendar agreed, which resulted in the Outrider being parked in the Echo Base hangar during the Battle of Hoth, which Rendar and Lebo narrowly escaped by flying through the asteroid field. Shortly after that, the Outrider was stationed at the moon Kile, where Rendar was again hired by the Alliance, this time to assist in an unsuccessful mission to rescue the carbon-frozen Han Solo from Boba Fett. He was also hired to assist in the capture of Imperial freighter Suprosa to capture information about the second Death Star. Rendar's final mission for the Rebellion was the battle over Coruscant in 3 ABY, a 3-way battle between the Empire, the Rebellion, and the Black Sun Crime Syndicate. As Imperial forces fired on the Black Sun leader Prince Xizor's repulsor lift platform, Rendar flew the Outrider into its skyweb to attack it from within so that he could have the satisfaction and prestige of saying he destroyed it himself. The Outrider appeared to have been destroyed, and Rendar and Lebo killed after this when it was struck by debris from the falling skyhook, but in reality this was a carefully crafted ruse by Rendar to escape Imperial attention, and more importantly, get the Rebellion to stop hiring him for such dangerous missions. Where he went afterward is currently unknown. And that's everything there is to know about the YT-2400. Let me know what you think of this ship and what else you'd like to see covered next. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share it with a friend. I'd love to get to 6,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if just 16 people subscribe every day, we should have no problem getting there. Anyway, I will see you next week. RFC, out.